All right, let's talk about what I did to get the He-Wing T1 Ranger back in the air after I broke it. Here's the parts that I physically broke and had to replace. This is for the tilt servo, $35 plus shipping. Shipping's not too bad with He-Wing, and it's very quick. I think a lot of the Chinese manufacturers have found that shipping by boat is just not working for them. And it's airmail. They're shipping airmail. This is what it costs to ship that part airmail, $5.29. Now I did screw up and I didn't add the battery plate to this order. I did that on a separate order here. That part was $4, but the $5.29 shipping was more than the part cost. But that got my two parts in the door, and it only cost me, I think, a grand total of, if you add those together, a grand total of about $53.48, including shipping. And the parts came in far less than 2 weeks. It was like a week and 3 days, 10 days, something like that. They were shipped out promptly. They arrived promptly. So I don't have as much problem ordering from Chinese companies as I used to. And here's the spin that did the damage. The GoPro on my head that day wasn't recording. I wished it was, because this was quite a sight to see as it spun around. One motor went up, one didn't. And it did quite a few revolutions before it hit the ground. It was something to see. So when I got past this high voltage tower right here, I pulled it into Q loiter, and that's when the damage happened. So to fix the airplane, in addition to the replacement parts for the broken parts, I switched it over to a Maytag H743 wing flight controller. I just really didn't like the flight controller that came with it. I'm testing the servo, the broken servo, here on the bench. I've just got it set up on a little servo tester. And every now and then I go over and turn it on and see if it goes through its throws, and then I turn it off and reset the throw to the other side, and then randomly I'll go over and turn it on again. So far the broken servo hasn't failed to rotate here. Well, I haven't been doing that but about one day and 2 or 3 tests. I don't know where the problem was. I think it was in the wiring, but to alleviate this and build it up, I switched out the flight controller with this one. Another reason I did it was because I wanted telemetry logs, data flash logs, and you can put a SD card in this one. There was no place for an SD card in the other one, although I've found out, and I'll show later, the data flash logs were basically disabled in the original construction. In addition to this flight controller, I put a Walksnail Avatar Pro on the front of it. Quite expensive. And the whole airplane, when I bought it, only cost $338.99 plus shipping. But the replacement parts I put in cost me a total of $342.41. I did not include the price of the M10 Q5883 GPS I put in the back of it because I took the original He-Wing GPS out. So I didn't add that cost to this. So I put more than the cost of the original airplane and repair parts back into it. Although the camera and the flight controller weren't repair parts, they were still part of what I did to repair it. So now I've got close to $700 in this airplane, double what it was when I bought it. So let's look now at some of the problems I had getting it going after I physically built all of this back up. As I have shown in my rebuild videos, because I put in the H743 wing and Mr. Piper used an H743 wing in his build, according to this video of Painless 360, I wanted to use Mr. Piper's perimeters. But as I'll show you here, that just really didn't work out for me. I messed with those perimeters on and off over a 10-day period. On the face of them, it seemed like it would be simple, but it turned out not to be that way. I could not use the perimeters in whole as they were, and those perimeters come from right here. For pilots with Maytag H743 wing flight controllers, here's your perimeters file. So here's the perimeters, and I downloaded them from here. But you'll notice if you go down through here, it's only a very few number of perimeters. And get rid of this comma at the bottom after you download it, if you download it, because I did download it and it didn't really work for me. Let me show you that. So here's a full default of Arduplane 4.40 perimeters, and if you'll notice here, there's 23 pages of them, or 1206 perimeters to a full perimeters file. So at first, when I tried to use Mr. Piper's, which is only 4 pages and only 165 perimeters, when I loaded in a default Arduplane 440 and installed these in, and here's how you do that. The best way to do it, rather than just load from file, a new perimeters file, in my humble opinion, is to do a compare perimeters. Here's Mr. Piper's perimeters. First thing I do is come down here and uncheck all. And at first I just put them in whole, all 165 of them or whatever. After I did that, my plane would not respond to practically anything. So I came back and I started looking at what of these would I use. Well, arming rudder I don't have to use. All these things down through here. I was really only interested in the Q perimeters until you enable the Q perimeters in a flight controller. They don't show in this list. His Q perimeters don't show right here because the Q perimeters in this default setup are not enabled, so there's nothing to compare them against. So the first thing you do is you come in here and just take this one thing over and you write that out. And then you reboot your flight controller, bring it back up. Oops. And connect again. Now this time, because the Q perimeters are enabled, when you do that same exact compare, you're going to get different results. And the different results you're going to get is when you get down to the Q parameters that are now enabled, you're just going to see a host of them starting right here, going down to here, are now showing. So what I did the next pass through is I just went and checked all these Q parameters. Figured I would leave all his other stuff alone and just try his Q parameters. So after checking all of these and then doing a continue, again, nothing would work. So then I decided I'm just going to build it up from scratch. So I put a default 440 in. I went in and enabled the Q parameters myself, and I went in and set up what I wanted to set up. There were a few differences with doing that. For instance, let me reset this here and reattach. Computer's slow today, kind of like me. There we go. So this was the kind of thing I got after putting his stuff in. I'm going, nah, that ain't right. What the hey? So what I ended up doing was putting the original parameters in from HeWing. We can do that real quick right here. And I'm just going to take them in whole. I'm using a bench FC instead of the actual HeWing. So after I did this and just put HeWing's original parameters on top of a default 440, things worked. It sort of worked as it did on the HeWing flight controller. Which I'll show here by rebooting real quick. Now, I'll show you in a second how many Q parameters there are, and I'd never put together a quad plane before. So, in this, particularly the servo outputs, oh man, what has got this computer so slow today? I liked this setup. I didn't understand why they had motor 2 and 1 reversed here. It doesn't matter. Ardu Pilot will handle it. And then there was no tail tilt servo. That kind of threw me. So putting the original parameters over this kind of made it, the motors tilt and everything when I ask it to. Let me look again here real quick at Mr. Piper's. If I put his over this. In whole. And I found during this all these outer ranges. Seems like that shouldn't even be a thing. Maybe it's a warning because basically you have to click yes on it all because if you don't, you are not going to get what you're really looking for. Clicking no on one of them will just mess you up. That's something I still don't fully understand. So we'll reboot here real quick. Reattach. You might not be able to hear the serial port doing its thing in the background, but I have to wait until it finishes its little thing. I think what I'm so slow here today for is because I'm using the headset and this on the external USB thing I have. So here's Mr. Piper's. Instead of starting out like Ardu plane tells you with a quad plane, setting it up first as an airplane, which will be AETR. He just ignored all that recommendation and documentation and just went down through here. And again, he split the flaperons. Again, this would not work for me, and I'm not doing a flaperon. It's easy to split the Y connector on the ailerons and make it into flaperons, but I'll do that later. I wanted to kind of go with what I understood first. So I'm sure this works for him, but it just didn't. Because I was in the learning stage, this just confused me more. So if you'll look at what I ended up going with, which we can do by putting my stuff in here. Continue. I guess I could do this off camera because it's taking so long, but I'm close to being finished here. Hopefully this won't get too long. La-di-da, la-di-da, la-di-da. Lot. And I did this 50 times or more, so pain in the butt. You notice one of my perimeters that has to be changed from both Mr. Piper's and the original is my flight controllers put in 180 degrees out because of the way the ESC cables go on the front of it and the battery hookup. So I chose to put it in completely 180 opposite of the forward arrow on the flight controller. So basically, when I started setting it up out of the box like I thought it should be set up, I got a configuration that more closely matched the original He-Wing perimeters than Mr. Piper's, which made more sense to me. Again, he's a developer for this. I think he's possibly even in the tuning portion of the software, so he knows much more than I do. So we'll see here in servo outputs. We got this AETR, which is normal. Notice my rudder's not down through here anymore. The tilt motors are next, and then I did the motors in order. The 3 motors, 1, 2, and 4. 3's not done on a tricopter. That didn't work for me. It wasn't until I added in again this Motor 7 tilt motor servo, which doesn't actually exist on the plane. But what it does, instead of a tilt servo, if you read through the quad plane documentation, this is how you set it up. So these two motors right here will tilt around and do yaw. So when I built it up normally as an airplane and then added my two tilts in and my three motors in, and it didn't work well, when I did add back in this tail tilt servo function, it started working like I wanted it to. Basics. Still had a lot of things to do. Now these two are my pass-throughs that I added later on my walk snail on the pan and tilt in the front, and on the pan I'm using the RCN scaled function, which just recently came into Ardu, which lets you expand your PWM range, and a 360 or a 270, which is what I'm using, servo will actually go to those limits. The one caveat about it is you can't change these numbers here. You have to go over into the full parameters list. What was that? RC11? No, it's actually servo. Yeah, it's actually servo. I think it is. Oops. Servo 10. No, must be servo 11. Yep. You have to come in right here and change those values to get expanded pulse width. And this 400 is a little low. I sent a message this week to Bonafide Pirate about how he was doing it on his, because that's where I got the 270 degree servo from him. Ordered them. Now he's using a 300 degree servo, so I'm going to have to step up a little more. I put this down to 300 or 200 at one point, and that darn servo turned past the end point and did a 360 and had my camera cable and my servo cable wrapped around the thing one time. So I had to back this off to 400. I should back it off to 500. But this does work well. So, with this setup similar to the He-Wing setup in the servo outputs, this all started working for me, and this is the way I'm running it right now. I did not reverse the two motors here like He-Wing did. It doesn't matter with Ardu. You can take motor 1 and put it down here on channel 16 if you want to. Ardu handles all this stuff. So this is my total servo outputs as they are. Now, during the video, when they're talking about they finally got their He-Wing VTOLs tuned reasonably, Mr. Piper said the one thing he had to do was set up the ESCs that come with the airplane as D-Shot. And to upgrade to Blue Jay so you can get that telemetry, you're going to have to use Google Chrome, and this address here, I'll put it in the notes. And you're going to have external power applied, or you can't read the ESC. So when you connect through the normal USB to that flight controller without Ardu Mission Planner attached to it, you can read the ESCs. Now you'll notice only ESC3 read that time. I'm not too thrilled with these ESCs, so I'm going to do it again. And you see all three of them were red that time. Also had problems with that. And if you look right here, you can see I flashed them to Blue Jay, all three of them. So that has to be done so you can use Mr. Piper's notch filters, which use ESC telemetry. So I then went into Mr. Piper's perimeters, and right here's his INS notch filter 2. Here's his notch filter 1 enabled, and here's the values for it. And I ran them in. I also used his gyro filter, to tell you the truth. I ran them into my platform by going into here, copying just those values, taking all these others out, saving this file away as it is right here, and comparing it in to my perimeters and accepting them. So I took his gyro filter. It changed it from 20 to like 80. I trust him on everything. It's just this perimeters did not work for me. Now they said in the video I think both were going to do a video on using their perimeters. Painless 360 has his set for the original flight controller, and Mr. Piper has his set for the H743. They expected that video would come out before the end of the year for both of them, according to what they said. I will revisit all of this when those videos come out and give me the extra help I need. So basically, this is all I ended up taking out of Mr. Piper's. I set up the servo outputs the way I wanted to, and then I came in here and got his notch filter 2, frequency of 75, bandwidth of 25, and also the modes he's using on both of those. And here's his first notch filter and its related information. And everything worked pretty good from that. I then tried to take his PIDs. That was again out of the same file. Oops. Exact same file. Well, and I've got a bunch of junk over here in my where I normally save my perimeters. So I then tried to take this, I did yesterday. I tried to take his QA rate, PI and D for pitch. That same thing for roll, PI, and where's his D? Right here's the D for roll, and for yaw. In other words, I came in here and knocked everything out of this again, except for these perimeters. Go all the way to the top, get rid of all of them, get rid of that, PI and D for pitch. This is roll. PI and D for roll. And then for yaw. And took all the rest of these out, period. So I had these 9 perimeters. Because I wanted to take his tuned PIDs out. I mean, use them. And you saw what it did yesterday. The yaw was obviously off and the tail was rocking back and forth, waving at me when I tested it yesterday. So I just went back to the default PIDs that come as part of autotuning 440, and that's what I flew yesterday. So, armed only with Mr. Piper's notch filters, I'm going to have to recreate his tuning flights, which is a quad tune and then an airplane tune, to get closer to what I hoped I would just pull in from his parameters. And then I hope he will do a video on his complete T1 Ranger VTOL tuning before the end of the year. I can wait if he does it in 2024. I'm going to go ahead and do it on my own, and I think that will get my plane where I really, really want it. And I don't think I really need to copy his in. Me doing the auto tunes on quad and airplane, I think we'll get near the same results he got while I'm using his notch filter settings. So that's what I flew yesterday, and what I'll be doing in the next few flights is those auto tunes, because the quad loiter and stuff is really sloppy. It needs those PIDs tightened up. So that's basically how I got the airplane back running. And as you saw, yesterday's flight went okay. It was a little windy. I had it far too high on speed and amp usage. I think my thumb was on the aileron channel and was rocking it around a little bit. But that all has to do with tuning, calming all that rocking back and forth down and stuff. So that's it. I'm going to go on to those tuning flights and other things now, because I got one really nice thing in the wings. Thank you, guys.